The morning sun cast long shadows across Windsor Castle as Catherine, Princess of Wales, stood quietly at her bedroom window. Her fingers traced the cold glass while she watched the gardeners tend to the roses below. These same roses had bloomed for decades, witnessing countless royal moments, but today felt different. Today carried a weight that pressed against her chest like a heavy stone. William entered the room behind her, his footsteps soft on the ancient wooden floors. He had been awake most of the night, sitting in his study, staring at documents that would change everything. The decision they had made together still felt surreal, like a dream from which they might wake at any moment. But the morning light confirmed what they both knew deep in their hearts. This was real, and there was no turning back. "The children are asking questions," Catherine said without turning around. Her voice was steady, but William could hear the tremor beneath her words. Charlotte had noticed the hushed conversations between her parents. George, now older and more aware of his future role, had sensed something significant brewing in the household. Even little Louis had picked up on the unusual tension that seemed to follow his parents from room to room. William moved to stand beside his wife, his hand finding hers. Together they looked out at the grounds that had been their sanctuary, their home, their responsibility. The weight of centuries of tradition seemed to settle on their shoulders like an invisible cloak. Every brick, every garden path, every carefully maintained tradition represented expectations that had been placed upon them since the day they said, "I do," in Westminster Abbey. The phone calls had been coming for weeks. Palace officials, government ministers, members of parliament, all wanting to discuss the future, all assuming that William and Catherine would continue down the path that had been laid out for them before they were even born. But sometimes life takes unexpected turns, and even those born to duty must choose between obligation and personal truth. Catherine turned to face her husband, studying the lines that had appeared around his eyes in recent months, the constant scrutiny, the endless duties, the weight of representing not just a family but an entire nation. It had taken its toll on both of them. They had given their best years, their energy, their privacy, and pieces of their souls to the crown. Now, standing in the quiet of their bedroom, they both knew that something fundamental had shifted. "Do you remember what you said to me the night before our wedding?" Catherine asked, her green eyes searching his face. William smiled, the first genuine smile she had seen from him in weeks. He remembered every word of that conversation, every promise they had made to each other in private, away from the cameras and the crowds and the expectations of millions. "I told you that no matter what happened, we would face it together," he replied, "that we would never lose ourselves in the role, that we would always remember who we were before the titles and the duties." Catherine nodded, tears forming in her eyes. They had tried so hard to keep that promise, to maintain their identity while serving their country, but the pressure had become overwhelming. The decision had not come suddenly. It had been building for months, perhaps even years. Small moments of doubt that grew into larger questions about their future, their children's future, and what kind of life they truly wanted to live. They had watched other members of the royal family struggle with similar choices, had seen the toll that constant public life could take on marriages, on children, on mental health and happiness. William walked to his desk and picked up a folder that had been sitting there for days. Inside were documents that their legal team had prepared, papers that would formalize what they had already decided in their hearts. The decision to step back from their royal duties had not been made lightly. They had consulted with advisors, therapists, and trusted friends. They had weighed every option, considered every consequence, and ultimately chose the path that felt most authentic to who they had become. "The statement is ready," William said quietly, holding up the folder. Catherine took a deep breath, knowing that once those words were released to the public, there would be no going back. The media would explode with speculation, criticism, and endless analysis of their choice. The public would be divided, some understanding their decision, others feeling betrayed or abandoned. As they stood together in the morning light, both William and Catherine felt a strange mixture of sadness and relief. Sadness for the end of a chapter that had defined their adult lives. Relief at the prospect of writing their own story going forward. They had served their country with dedication and love, but now it was time to serve their family, their marriage, and their own well-being in a different way. The children's laughter echoed from the garden below, a reminder of what mattered most to them. George, Charlotte, and Louis deserved parents who were present, who were happy, who could show them that duty to oneself and one's family was just as important as duty to country. This decision, difficult as it was, represented their commitment to being the parents and partners they wanted to be, rather than the public figures they were expected to remain. The Kensington Palace communications team had been working around the clock for 3 days straight. Coffee cups overflowed from trash bins, and the usual pristine appearance of the office had given way to organized chaos. Press releases had been drafted, redrafted, and scrutinized by lawyers, palace officials, and the couple themselves. Every word mattered. Every phrase would be analyzed and debated by millions of people around the world. Jason, the communications secretary, sat across from William and Catherine in the private sitting room they used for sensitive meetings. His face showed the strain of the past week. He had been fielding calls from journalists who sensed something major was brewing. The rumor mill had been spinning wildly, with speculation ranging from health issues to marriage problems to political disagreements. None of the gossip came close to the truth. The BBC wants first confirmation, Jason explained, his voice hoarse from countless phone conversations. They're prepared to interrupt regular programming for a special announcement. The other networks are standing by as well. Catherine felt her stomach tighten. The reality of going public with their decision was hitting her in waves, each one more intense than the last. William leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. What about the family? What about the Queen? The question hung in the air like a heavy fog. They had already had the most difficult conversation of their lives with Queen Elizabeth just 2 days earlier. The meeting had taken place in the Oak Room at Windsor, with just the 3 of them present. No advisors, no staff, no formality, just a grandmother trying to understand her grandson's choice. The Queen had listened without interruption, as William and Catherine explained their reasons. She had asked thoughtful questions about their plans, about the children, about their hopes for the future. When they finished speaking, she had been quiet for a long moment, her hands folded in her lap, her expression unreadable. Finally, she had spoken in the gentle voice they knew so well. I have always believed that the monarchy must serve the people, but sometimes we forget that the people serving the monarchy are human beings with their own needs and dreams. King Charles had been a different conversation entirely. As the next in line and William's father, he carried his own complex emotions about the decision. There had been raised voices, difficult questions about duty and sacrifice, and painful discussions about what this would mean for the future of the crown. But in the end, he had embraced his son and daughter-in-law, telling them that while he wished circumstances were different, he respected their choice and would support them publicly. The children had been the hardest conversation of all. George, at his young age, already understood the weight of expectation that came with his birth order. He had asked if this meant he would never be king, his voice small and uncertain. William had knelt down to his son's level, explaining that sometimes adults have to make very difficult choices, and that being a good person was more important than any title or role. Charlotte had cried not because she understood the full implications, but because she could sense her parents' sadness. Louis had simply asked if they were still going to live together as a family, which had brought tears to both William and Catherine's eyes. The statement needs to go out today, Catherine said finally, breaking the silence that had settled over the room. Every day we wait makes it harder on everyone, the staff, the family, ourselves. She was right, and everyone in the room knew it. The longer they delayed, the more speculation would grow, and the more difficult the eventual announcement would become. Jason nodded and began reading from the carefully crafted statement one final time. The words were formal but heartfelt, explaining that after much consideration, the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge had decided to step back from their roles as senior working royals. They would continue to support causes close to their hearts, but would no longer carry out official duties on behalf of the Crown. The statement emphasized their gratitude for the support they had received from the public and their commitment to raising their children with the values of service and compassion that had guided their public life. And as Jason read, Catherine found herself thinking about all the people this decision would affect. The charities they had supported, the patronages they would have to give up, the staff members whose jobs might be impacted. She thought about the young people who looked up to them as role models, the couples who had followed their love story, the parents who admired how they balanced public duty with family life. There will be criticism, Jason warned, though he hardly needed to state the obvious. Some people will see this as abandonment of duty. Others will question the timing, especially given current global challenges. The tabloids will be relentless in their coverage, and social media will be— He paused, searching for the right words. Brutal, William finished for him. We know. We've talked about this extensively. We understand that some people will never forgive us for this choice, and we've made peace with that reality. Catherine reached over and took her husband's hand, a gesture of solidarity that had become second nature over their years of marriage. The irony was not lost on either of them that in order to reclaim their privacy, they first had to make their most personal decision completely public. They would have to explain themselves to a world that felt entitled to their service, justify their choice to people who had never faced the unique pressures of royal life, and accept judgment from those who could never truly understand their situation. Outside the palace walls, photographers had been gathering since dawn, sensing that something significant was about to happen. The usual crowd of royal watchers had swelled to include serious news crews from around the world. Social media was already buzzing with speculation. Hashtags were trending, and news websites were preparing their servers for the traffic surge that would follow any major royal announcement. It's time, Catherine said quietly, her voice steady despite the magnitude of the moment. William squeezed her hand, and together they nodded to Jason, who picked up his phone to make the call that would change their lives forever. The news broke at exactly 3:47 p.m. London time on a Tuesday afternoon. Within seconds of the palace's official statement being released, news websites crashed from the unprecedented traffic. Social media platforms struggled to keep up with the millions of posts, comments, and reactions flooding their systems. The hashtag #William and Kate became the top trending topic worldwide within minutes, surpassing even major sporting events and political developments. In living rooms across Britain, people stopped what they were doing as news anchors interrupted regular programming with the shocking announcement. The BBC's Hugh Edwards delivered the news with his characteristic gravitas, but even his experienced voice carried a note of surprise. This was not the kind of royal news anyone had anticipated. Retirement, scandal, even divorce. These were scenarios that royal correspondents had prepared for over the years. But a voluntary stepping back by the future king and queen, this was unprecedented in modern royal history. Catherine sat in her private office at Kensington Palace, watching the coverage unfold on multiple screens. Her press secretary had warned her that the first few hours would be intense, but nothing could have prepared her for the sheer scale of the response. News helicopters circled overhead, their cameras trained on every window and entrance of the palace. The gates were surrounded by a crowd that seemed to grow larger by the minute, reporters, photographers, and curious members of the public who had dropped everything to witness this historic moment. Her phone buzzed constantly with messages from friends, family members, and colleagues. Some offered support and understanding, others expressed shock and confusion. A text from her sister Pippa simply read, "Are you okay? Call me when you can." Another from a close friend said, "Proud of you for choosing your family. The world will understand eventually." But there were also messages that stung from people she had considered allies who questioned her commitment and suggested she was abandoning her responsibilities. William paced in his study, unable to sit still as he watched the news coverage. The reactions were exactly as divided as they had predicted. Younger viewers seemed more supportive, with many social media posts praising the couple for prioritizing their mental health and family well-being. Older generations appeared more critical, with some calling the decision selfish and un-British. Royal experts filled the airwaves with analysis, some defending the couple's choice while others painted it as a crisis for the monarchy. The children were being kept away from all television and internet access, but even they could sense the unusual energy in the household. Staff members moved with heightened urgency, extra security personnel had been deployed, and their normal routines had been completely disrupted. George, always perceptive, asked his nanny why there were so many cars outside their home. She gently explained that many people were interested in the announcement Mommy and Daddy had made, and that things would be different for a while. International reactions began pouring in as the news spread globally. The Prime Minister's office released a carefully worded statement, expressing respect for the couple's decision and thanking them for their years of service. The Archbishop of Canterbury offered prayers and support for their family during this transition. Leaders from Commonwealth nations released their own statements, most expressing understanding while emphasizing the couple's continued connection to their countries. But perhaps the most watched reaction came from within the royal family itself. King Charles released a personal statement that struck a careful balance between respect for his son's choice and reassurance about the monarchy's future. "While I am saddened by William and Catherine's decision to step back, I understand and support their need to prioritize their family's well-being," the statement read. "They have served this nation with distinction, and they will always be beloved members of our family." The Queen's response was more formal but equally supportive. Her statement, released through Buckingham Palace, emphasized the couple's years of dedicated service and expressed her hope that they would find happiness and peace in their new path. Reading between the lines, royal watchers noted that there was no criticism or disappointment in her words, unusual for a monarch who had devoted her entire life to duty above personal desires. As evening approached, the media coverage began to shift from shock to analysis. Constitutional experts debated the implications for the line of succession. Mental health advocates praised the couple for modeling the importance of self-care. Religious leaders discussed the balance between service to others and care for oneself. Political commentators wondered about the timing and potential motivations behind the decision. Catherine finally turned off the televisions and closed her laptop, unable to absorb any more commentary about their choice. She walked to the children's playroom where George was building with blocks, Charlotte was drawing, and Louis was playing with toy cars. The normalcy of the scene struck her powerfully. These three beautiful children, blissfully unaware that their parents had just made one of the most significant decisions in modern royal history, simply playing and being kids. "Mummy, will you read to us tonight?" Charlotte asked, looking up from her drawing. The innocent question brought tears to Catherine's eyes. This was why they had made their choice. For moments like these, for the ability to be present parents without the constant pull of official duties and public expectations. "Of course, darling," Catherine replied, settling onto the floor beside her daughter. "What would you like to hear?" As she began reading a simple children's story about a family of rabbits, Catherine felt a sense of peace settle over her for the first time in months. Outside, the world was debating their decision, analyzing their motives and speculating about their future. But inside this room, with her children gathered around her, she knew they had chosen correctly. The criticism would fade, the headlines would move on to other stories, but the time they would gain with their family would be precious and irreplaceable. William appeared in the doorway, having finished his own review of the day's coverage. He smiled at the scene before him, his wife and children together removed from the chaos they had created with their announcement. He thought about all the official events they would miss, all the ribbon cuttings and state dinners and ceremonial duties they would no longer perform. Surprisingly, instead of sadness, he felt only relief. They had chosen love over duty, family over tradition, and personal truth over public expectation. History would judge them, but they could live with that judgment as long as they were living authentically. 3 weeks had passed since the announcement, and the initial media frenzy had settled into a steady hum of ongoing coverage. Catherine stood in her dressing room at Kensington Palace, staring at the formal gown hanging before her. It was a deep navy blue, elegant and understated, chosen specifically for tonight's event, their final official engagement as senior working royals. The irony was not lost on her that their last bow would be at a charity gala for mental health awareness, a cause that had become deeply personal to both of them over recent years. Tonight's event would be different from all the others they had attended. Every gesture would be scrutinized, every smile analyzed, every word dissected for hidden meaning. The media had dubbed it their farewell tour, though William and Catherine preferred to think of it as a celebration of the work they had accomplished rather than a goodbye performance. Still, the weight of finality hung heavy in the air. William appeared behind her, adjusting his bow tie in the mirror. They had been married for over a decade, had attended hundreds of formal events together, but tonight felt unlike any other. "Are you ready for this?" he asked, though he knew the question was more complex than it appeared. Were they ready for the event itself? Yes. Were they ready for the emotional weight of their final official appearance? That was harder to answer. I keep thinking about our first gala, Catherine replied, smoothing imaginary wrinkles from her dress. I was so nervous I could barely speak to anyone. You had to practically push me into conversations. William smiled at the memory. Catherine had been terrified of making mistakes, of saying the wrong thing, of somehow embarrassing the family she had married into. Now, years later, she moved through these events with natural grace, equally comfortable speaking with heads of state or charity volunteers. The car ride to the venue was quiet, both lost in their own thoughts. They passed through streets lined with photographers and well-wishers, some holding signs of support, others simply wanting to catch a glimpse of the couple on their final night of official duty. Catherine waved mechanically, muscle memory taking over where emotion failed her. She found herself studying faces in the crowd, wondering what these people thought of their decision, whether they understood the reasons behind it. The Royal Festival Hall had been transformed for the evening. Hundreds of guests filled the elegant space, charity workers, celebrities, government officials, and members of the public who had won tickets through fundraising efforts. As William and Catherine entered, a hush fell over the room that had nothing to do with protocol and everything to do with the historic nature of the evening. Everyone present understood they were witnessing the end of an era. Their first stop was meeting with the charity organizers, people who had worked alongside them for years to destigmatize mental health issues and provide support for those struggling. These were the hardest conversations of the evening, saying goodbye to colleagues who had become friends, explaining that while they would continue to care about these causes, they could no longer offer the same level of official support. Sarah, a counselor who had worked with them on several initiatives, struggled to maintain her professional composure. "You've changed so many lives," she told Catherine, her voice thick with emotion. "Young people who were afraid to seek help saw you talking openly about mental health and found the courage to get support. That impact will continue long after tonight." Throughout the evening, similar conversations played out dozens of times. A veteran who had participated in their Heads Together campaign thanked William for helping him realize he wasn't weak for struggling with PTSD. A teenager who had attempted suicide credited their mental health advocacy with saving her life. Parents whose children had benefited from programs the couple had championed expressed gratitude that went far deeper than formal thanks. The speeches began after dinner, with various officials praising William and Catherine's contributions to the causes represented that evening. When William rose to speak, the room fell completely silent. His words were carefully chosen, balancing gratitude for the work they had been able to do with hope for the future of these important initiatives. "Catherine and I have learned so much from all of you over these years," he began, his voice steady but emotional. "You have taught us that real change happens not in palace rooms or government offices, but in communities and families, in moments of human connection. While our roles may be changing, our commitment to these values remains constant." Catherine's speech focused on the people she had met through their charitable work, the single mothers learning new skills through training programs, the young people finding their voices through arts initiatives, the families supporting loved ones through mental health challenges. She spoke without notes, her words coming from the heart rather than any prepared text. "You have shown us what resilience looks like, what hope can accomplish, and what happens when people choose to care for each other." As the formal program concluded, the couple moved through the crowd for final conversations and photographs. The mood was bittersweet, celebratory of what had been accomplished, but tinged with sadness for what would no longer be. Many guests approached them not with requests for continued support, but with expressions of understanding and good wishes for their family's future. Near the end of the evening, Catherine found herself in conversation with Emma, a young mother whose daughter had struggled with anxiety. "I want you to know that what you've done tonight, making this choice for your family, it matters," Emma said quietly. "My daughter is watching, and she's seeing that it's okay to put your own well-being first. That's a lesson worth teaching." The final moments of the evening were the most difficult. As they prepared to leave, staff members who had worked with them for years lined up to say goodbye. Some had been reassigned to other royals. Others had chosen to leave royal service entirely rather than work for someone else. These people had been more than employees. They had been part of their extended family, sharing in both triumphant moments and challenging times. Maria, Catherine's dresser for the past 5 years, struggled not to cry as she helped with the final adjustments to the evening gown. "It has been the greatest privilege of my life to work with you," she whispered. Catherine embraced her, both women understanding that they were saying goodbye to more than just a working relationship. As their car pulled away from the venue, both William and Catherine turned to look back at the building where they had just concluded their final official engagement. The photographer's flashes still lit up the night sky, but inside the car was a cocoon of quiet reflection. They had done it. They had said goodbye with dignity, grace, and genuine emotion. No regrets? William asked as they drove through the London streets toward home. Catherine considered the question seriously. About tonight? None. About our decision? None. About leaving behind work that mattered to us? That's harder to answer. She paused, watching the city lights blur past the window. But I keep thinking about what that mother said, that our choice matters too. Maybe that's part of service as well, showing that it's okay to choose a different path. The weeks following their final official engagement brought an unexpected quiet to their lives. For the first time in over a decade, Catherine woke up without an official schedule waiting on her bedside table. No appointments with ambassadors, no charity visits, no state functions requiring careful diplomatic navigation. The silence of her calendar felt both liberating and unsettling, like stepping off a moving train after years of constant motion. William found himself walking the grounds of their home with new eyes, noticing details that had been lost in the blur of constant activity. The way morning light filtered through the old oak trees, the sound of his children's laughter carrying across the garden, the simple pleasure of reading a book without interruption. These small moments, once squeezed between official duties, now had room to breathe and expand. The public reaction had evolved from shock to acceptance, though divisions remained. Polls showed the nation split almost evenly between those who supported their decision and those who felt disappointed by it. Younger generations seemed more understanding, while older Britons expressed feelings of abandonment and concern about the future of the monarchy. International media coverage ranged from sympathetic to critical, with some praising their courage while others questioned their commitment to duty. The children had adapted to the changes with remarkable resilience. George no longer asked about the photographers outside their gates, and Charlotte had stopped wondering why Mummy and Daddy seemed so much more relaxed during family dinners. Louis, at his young age, simply enjoyed having his parents more present and available for bedtime stories and morning walks. The family dynamics had shifted in subtle but meaningful ways, with natural conversation replacing the careful scheduling that had previously governed their time together. Catherine discovered aspects of motherhood she had missed during their busiest years of royal duty. She could now attend school plays without security cordons, help with homework without rushing to the next engagement, and have impromptu conversations with other parents at school pickup. These ordinary moments felt extraordinary to someone who had lived under constant scrutiny for so long. The transition hadn't been without challenges. Both William and Catherine struggled with questions about their identity beyond their royal roles. Who were they when stripped of titles and official duties? What did their days look like when not structured around state obligations? The freedom they had fought for sometimes felt overwhelming, like suddenly having too many choices after years of predetermined schedules. They began exploring new possibilities for their future. Private foundations focused on causes close to their hearts, business ventures that could provide financial independence, educational opportunities they had always wanted to pursue. William expressed interest in environmental conservation work that could happen away from the public eye. Catherine considered returning to her interest in photography, perhaps pursuing projects that combined art with social advocacy. The royal family had rallied around them in unexpected ways. King Charles, despite his initial concerns, had become a source of wisdom and support, sharing his own struggles with balancing personal desires against royal expectations. The Queen made regular private visits, offering both practical advice about transitioning away from official duties and emotional support for the difficult adjustment period. Other members of the royal family had quietly expressed their own questions about the balance between duty and personal fulfillment. Conversations at family gatherings had become more honest, with relatives sharing their own struggles with the constraints of royal life. Some admitted feeling envious of William and Catherine's courage to choose a different path, while others doubled down on their commitment to traditional royal service. The media attention, while diminished, had not disappeared entirely. Photographers still followed them, though with less intensity than during their official years. News outlets continued to cover their activities, but the focus had shifted from official engagements to speculation about their future plans. Privacy, the thing they had most wanted to reclaim, remained elusive but had improved significantly from their years as senior working royals. Catherine found herself grocery shopping for the first time in years, a simple task that felt both mundane and miraculous. Standing in the produce section, choosing vegetables for dinner, she felt a connection to normal life that had been missing for so long. Other shoppers occasionally recognized her, but the interactions were gentle, more curiosity than intrusion. Their marriage had strengthened in ways they hadn't anticipated. Without the constant pressure of official duties, they rediscovered each other as people, rather than just partners in royal service. Evening conversations were no longer dominated by briefings for the next day's events. Weekend time belonged to them as a family rather than to ceremonial obligations. They remembered why they had fallen in love in the first place, beyond the shared burden of royal responsibility. The financial implications of their decision had required careful planning. While they retained some private wealth, losing their official allowance meant adjusting their lifestyle and finding new sources of income. This challenge, rather than feeling burdensome, had brought a sense of purpose and independence that neither had experienced since their youth. Friends who had been part of their royal circle responded differently to the change. Some remained close, drawn to William and Catherine as people rather than as royal figures. Others drifted away, their relationships having been built more on official connections than personal bonds. New friendships began to form with people who had no connection to royal life. Relationships based purely on shared interests and genuine compatibility. The question of their children's future loomed large in their planning. George, as third in line to the throne, would still face expectations about his eventual role, but the pressure felt different now. Without his parents actively modeling royal service, he would have more time to discover his own interests and personality before facing decisions about his future. Charlotte and Louis had even more freedom to chart their own courses, unburdened by the immediate expectations that had shaped their parents' lives. As spring turned to summer, William and Catherine found themselves planning their first family vacation in years that wouldn't be documented by official photographers or constrained by security protocols appropriate for working royals. The anticipation felt like preparing for an adventure rather than fulfilling an obligation. They were becoming private citizens in ways they had almost forgotten were possible, rediscovering the simple pleasure of making choices based on their own desires rather than public expectations. 1 year later, Catherine sat in a small cafe in a quiet village in Norfolk, watching through the window as William taught Louis how to ride a bicycle in the local park. The scene was so beautifully ordinary that she had to pause to appreciate it. No security detail hovering nearby, no photographers capturing every moment, no official schedule dictating when this family time would end. Just a father helping his son master a new skill, while other families in the park did the same. The transformation in their lives had been more profound than either had anticipated. The constant tension that had lived in Catherine's shoulders for years had gradually disappeared. She slept better, laughed more freely, and found herself engaging in conversations without the careful calculation that had once been necessary for every public interaction. The simple act of speaking, her mind without considering diplomatic implications, felt like a luxury she had forgotten existed. William had thrown himself into environmental conservation work with an enthusiasm that surprised everyone, including himself. Working with a small foundation focused on rewilding projects across Britain, he spent his days in fields and forests rather than conference rooms and state dining halls. His hands were often dirty now, his schedule determined by weather and seasons rather than protocol and precedents. The work felt meaningful in a way that ribbon cuttings and ceremonial duties, however well-intentioned, never had. The public had largely moved on, as public attention always does. New royal stories had taken the place of their departure in the headlines. Younger royals had stepped up to fill some of the gaps left by their absence, and the monarchy had adapted to function without them. Occasionally, polls still asked about their decision, and the results showed a gradual shift toward acceptance and even admiration for their choice to prioritize family and personal well-being. Their children had thrived in ways that validated every difficult moment of their transition. George had discovered a love of music and spent afternoons learning piano without worrying about how this hobby might photograph for official portraits. Charlotte had joined a local drama group where she was just another enthusiastic child actor, not a princess whose every performance would be scrutinized. Louis attended regular playgroups where his friends knew him simply as Louis, not as His Royal Highness. The family's financial situation had stabilized through a combination of careful investments, William's conservation work, and Catherine's quietly successful return to photography. She had begun documenting British wildlife and countryside, with her work appearing in magazines and exhibitions. The critics praised her eye for composition and her ability to capture intimate moments in nature. That her photographs sold well because of her former royal status didn't diminish her genuine talent or the satisfaction she found in creative work. Their marriage had evolved from a partnership in royal service to a collaboration in building the life they truly wanted. Evening conversations now covered their children's school projects, weekend plans for hiking or visiting friends, and dreams for the future that didn't require constitutional approval. They had remembered how to be spontaneous, how to make decisions based on their own desires rather than public expectations. The relationship with the royal family had settled into a new normal. King Charles called regularly, sharing updates about official duties but also asking about his grandchildren's latest adventures. The Queen visited when her schedule allowed, delighting in being able to simply be a great-grandmother rather than a monarch during these private family moments. The conversations were warmer and more genuine than they had been during the formal years of official service. Catherine had reconnected with old friends from university and her working years before marriage, relationships that had been strained by the formality and security requirements of royal life. These friendships, rekindled over coffee dates and casual dinners, reminded her of who she had been before becoming a duchess. She was rediscovering aspects of her personality that had been suppressed by the need to always represent the crown with appropriate dignity. The media attention had decreased to manageable levels. Photographers occasionally appeared at school events or during family outings, but the intensity was nothing like their years as working royals. Privacy laws and changing public interest had combined to give them something approaching normal family life. They had learned to find joy in small victories that would once have seemed insignificant. Catherine could attend parent-teacher conferences without causing a diplomatic incident. William could take his children to the local playground without requiring advanced security sweeps. They could argue about household decisions without worrying about how disagreements might be perceived by the public or reported by the press. The question of regrets had been asked countless times in the past year, by journalists, friends, and themselves in quiet moments. The honest answer remained complex. They missed the platform their royal roles had provided for highlighting important causes. They sometimes felt guilty about the charities that had lost their patronage and the communities that had valued their official visits. The sense of serving something larger than themselves had been meaningful, even when it came at personal cost. But watching Louis finally master his bicycle, seeing the pure pride on William's face as he ran alongside their son, Catherine felt certain they had chosen correctly. The children were growing up with parents who were present, not just physically but emotionally available in ways that constant official duties had made difficult. They were learning that success could be measured in personal happiness and family bonds, not just in public service and duty fulfillment. The sunset painted the park in golden light as the family packed up their bicycles and headed home. Other families were doing the same. Parents calling children from swings, gathering scattered toys, planning evening routines of baths and bedtime stories. William and Catherine had joined this ordinary rhythm of family life, and it felt like coming home after a very long journey. As they walked back to their car, Charlotte slipped her hand into Catherine's, chatting about her upcoming school play and asking if Mummy would help with costume alterations. These were the conversations Catherine had dreamed of during endless state dinners and formal receptions, normal childhood concerns shared between mother and daughter without the pressure of representing anything more than their own family relationship. That evening, after the children were in bed, William and Catherine sat together in their living room with cups of tea, planning the following weekend's activities. A visit to William's conservation project, Charlotte's friend's birthday party, a family hike in the countryside. Simple plans that required no security briefings, No diplomatic considerations, no official protocols. Do you think history will judge us kindly? Catherine asked, a question that had lingered unspoken between them for months. William considered this thoughtfully. I think history will remember that we tried to serve our country with honor, and then we chose to serve our family with the same dedication. Both choices required courage, and I believe both were correct for their time. Outside their window, the village settled into evening quiet. No photographers waited at their gates, no official cars idled in their driveway, no red boxes of government documents demanded attention. They had traded the grandeur of royal service for the intimacy of private life, and in that trade they had found something precious that all their years of duty had never provided: the simple peace of living authentically. The little girl who had once dreamed of fairy tale romance had grown into a woman who understood that true happiness lay not in crowns and ceremonies, but in the daily choice to build a life that honored both service to others and care for oneself. Their last vow had indeed left the nation divided, some in grief for what they had lost, others in admiration for what they had found. But for William and Catherine, surrounded by their children's laughter and free to write their own story, the curtain had fallen on one act only to rise on another, perhaps more beautiful than anything that had come before.